So we're going to do something a little bit different tonight. We normally do our back markers and midfield and then podium. There was so much that kind of went through this race. We've kind of got a listing of what we think everything happened. So Deanna, these are your notes. So I'm going to kind of throw it to you, and I'm going to have you kind of narrate us through at least everything we kind of figured we know, and then John will do the Max and the Lewis piece, and then we'll kind of go from there.
All right. So basically, overarching the race, here's everything that I think happened. I'm probably missing things, but we'll see what happens. So at the race start, actually, I was very shocked. Not much happened, other than a couple little incidents between Stroll and Russell and Tsunoda and Ocon. But we made it a full 10 laps before Schumacher, unfortunately, lost it and put it in the wall in turn 22. And that brought out a safety car. So full safety car. So we were on lap 10, people are deciding to pit early. And so of those, the people who pitted was Hamilton, Bottas, Leclerc, Norris, Stroll, Latifi, Alonso, Perez, and Russell. Also a little bit of drama there on the entrance to the pit, Bottas holding up Verstappen so he could do the double stack at Mercedes. That wasn't investigated later, but that was just one of the many things that happened today. Anyway, so then 4 laps later, we get a red flag, which at that point seemed a little bit strange that we waited this long to get the red flag.
I went back and watched it. 9 minutes after the safety car came out is when the red flag was dropped.
And it wasn't the barrier, like, I'm sure they did repairs and everything, which is good, but it didn't look in a horrendous shape. So, a bit of a strange time, but because of that, the people who benefited were the people that didn't pit, because under red flag, you can change your tires and avoid a pit stop. So the people that benefited from that were Verstappen, who was leading the race at that point, and then Ocon, Ricciardo, Gasly, Sainz, Gio Tsunoda, Vettel, and Mazepin were the ones that hadn't pitted yet.
So this seems to be the first real pivotal point or first thing that I think we should stop and kind of get into and analyze here. So like you said, the 9 minutes or the 5 laps or the 4 laps between when the safety car comes out and then we have the decision to make a red flag. When I saw the impact, I instantly thought that was going to be a red flag across the board, just based on the Leclerc incident from, back in practice, where they basically had to stop the session because you figured that it was going to take a really long time to clean up. But when they made the decision to then do it, I'm speculating, but here's what I think happened. I think they thought they were going to be able to recover the car cleanly, and then when they couldn't, they're radioing now to Masi in the FIA office and saying, look, this is harder than we think it's going to be. Then he decides to throw the red flag. The problem is you've already had a round of these pit stops, and you've got the list of the people who, benefited and the people who suffered because of it. It's weird timing. I would have thrown the red flag right away and been done with it. That's what I think should have happened. Another thing to consider, and this was, I forget who it was who said this, but there weren't cranes at this track. It's a road course. It's Monaco-esque. There aren't the lifting cranes. So they literally don't have the time to get the cars out of the way like they normally would, or you would expect at a track like this. So a couple of different, I think, things that kind of came together. It proves to be, I think, really awful timing. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly a significant turning point in the race.
Yeah, I'm still very surprised they didn't throw the red flag immediately, because they had so many of those incidents in F2 and the same corner, so they knew it was going to take forever. So either you just commit to that and commit to the safety car. The weird kind of pulling out in the middle is just not great. And then they created this whole big situation for themselves, which is strange. But I did also want to bring up, I tweeted about this earlier. So red flags this year, because everybody's talking about Max getting a benefit.
He's certainly not the only one.
No. But across this year, having this red flag rule, whether you agree with it or not, is probably the next place to go here. It's had pretty major impacts on this championship this year. So you started in Imola, Lewis loses his front wing, red flag comes out, he's able to pit or able to change that under the red flag. So doesn't have to pit to get that fixed. 2, in Silverstone, when he and Max come together, he has damage from that, probably would have retired had there not been a red flag. Hungary, again, Verstappen had damage that time, able to fix that under the red flag, probably would have retired. Again, though, just like 2 points there, but still every point counts, we're seeing.
Clearly.
And then here today, Max gets a free pit stop. So what are the thoughts on, should we get rid of this rule? Is it okay? What do we think?
I don't have a problem with you being able to fix damage. Where I have the problem with is giving everybody this effective de facto free pit stop, because if you're saying tires are basically the only really strategy that we're giving people, because you don't have time to make front wing adjustments, you don't have time to do any sort of aero bits, you're locked in prior to the race. So your tires are basically the only thing that you're really changing. Why you're benefiting 3/4 at least of the midfield, and then even the race leader, when it's a strategy decision, when that comes out, the race should just basically be suspended, and we should just pick up where we left off. If you were on old tires, well, guess what? You get to be on old tires now. Everybody can come around, add an extra lap to the safety car when they restart it, to let everybody who wants to come in, put whatever tires on, then go back to the grid after that, and go do your standing or rolling start.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I'll be honest with you. It benefited obviously my boy in Imola, but if you go back and watch that episode, I think I was pretty clear on that too. I hate this rule. Absolutely hate it. I think it's like the only major form of motorsports that I'm aware of in the world that allows you to do this.
Right.
My favorite thing was Jimmy Johnson tweeting, being like, "This is a rule,"
which is funny because Nashville.
Somebody tell the dude at the Daytona 500 that you could fix it under a red flag.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen NASCAR drivers basically kick the side of their car under red flag conditions and get parked for the day. Jimmy Johnson in the IndyCar race at Nashville tried to adjust the wing. He had some damage, was instantly black flagged for the rest of the day. I agree with you. It shouldn't be allowed. I'm almost in a certain, like, with the exception of like a puncture, and even then, I don't know how they do it. I mean, it'd be complicated, but I almost feel like you'd be forced to throw in an old set of tires and then still be mandated to come around and do a full pit stop just to get you back, around, so it's not a dangerous situation. Other than that, I don't think you should be able to touch it. And maybe we'd have more retirements, but it's crazy. You see some of these cars that are basically almost completely rebuilt under, some of these lengthy red flags. And it's benefited Hamilton, it's benefited Max this year, but in the grand scheme of things, it's just not a way. And I was pretty livid today because it looked pretty certain there for a hot second that, Max was getting ready to take a commanding championship lead based on his pace, just purely based on waiting 8 minutes and 43 seconds to drop the red flag. So
and it wasn't like every car and every engineer had this discussion. I know because I listened to Norris's radio. They had that discussion. They were saying, let's wait to see if a red flag comes out. And then when it didn't, that's when they made the decision finally to box. And lost in all that. He's the one that got screwed over the most, by the way.
Yep.
He goes from 6th to 14th and basically ends his day at that point. I mean, we're on a place where track position is king. He's now way behind it. When you would have thought he would have gotten bailed out because he was the only soft runner. And when I saw a safety car, I'm like, oh, maybe, this could turn into something really good. But the rest of that midfield gets that free pit stop, and there goes your strategy call right out the window.
Can we just say that this whole day was pretty much a black eye for Michael Masi?
I don't think he had a very good day.
It was
if you start in the Formula 2 race, I personally, and I think Andy, I think you said something too on Twitter, I was shocked that they restarted that race, given that 2 drivers were just airlifted out.
Oh, not only that, but the schedule, they were butting up against the F1 schedule.
It didn't make any sense.
They canceled the driver parade because they tried to get this in. It didn't at that point. Yeah. What do you have to gain by that? I mean, there's the show. You tried to make the show. You had problems even before the F2 race, some sort of a barrier problem that you couldn't detect the entirety of the day until you went out and did your safety check 20 minutes before lights out of the F2 race. Come on.
Yeah. It was like the F2 race wasn't going to happen. And then it did happen. And then we had a major incident right at the start, huge red flag. We decided to restart it for some reason, even though it's already a short race and we're already on a time crunch. And then, even the shortened race doesn't last very long because we go right back into yet another red flag, which then goes into your point, Deanna. How does it take 9 minutes to throw a red flag when you already had incidents that clearly showed you from an hour earlier in the day that you weren't going to easily get that car out of there. Yeah, and then
we have the cacophony of virtual safety cars because we can't clear debris. When I thought if you actually were going to do that, you throw a full safety car and you get it cleaned up.
Yeah, just do it right.
Go through it.
Yep.
I've said this before. I think I don't know if it was a race or two ago. If a VSC has to last more than a minute or so, just throw the full safety car. Because it seems like 2 or so races in a row or during a pretty quick sequence here that we've had significantly long VSCs. And I'm just like, why are we doing this?
Right.
Just pack it up and let's get the Aston Martin out there and let's follow around the leader a little bit. But the other thing going on to Michael Masi, it still surprised me even how long it took for the safety car to get called on the incident with Schumacher. It's like an uncomfortable amount of time. Yeah, obviously there's double yellows immediately, thankfully, but it was an uncomfortable amount of time from the double yellows to even when the safety car was thrown.
Yeah.
And then you had the 843 after that. The whole thing was awkward.
I mean, they were doing that all weekend for F2. They would kind of let them race through the last 2 sectors and then kind of throw, or maybe not quite all the way through, but then they'd throw it before they got back there, which is a decision.
Yeah, I mean, and you can trace, I think, all of this back to the track was finished on Friday morning, and so you didn't have those junior races that we talked about in the preview. It all, I think, stems from they put it together Friday freaking morning, and this is what you get.
It's almost like we talked about this before. Oh, that's right, we did on Wednesday night. We were like, seems like a bad idea. I rest my case.
Exactly. Right. No, I agree with you on that.
What happened next, Deanna?
So
after that, so we have our first red flag, and then we get a full standing start. So off of this standing start was a little bit more dramatic than the last. So into the first corner, I believe Lewis got a better start, and then Verstappen went off track and gained a lasting advantage. But in all of that chaos, Ocon sneaked in between Verstappen and Hamilton. So we had that going on out front. Then behind, you had Leclerc and Perez battling, and Leclerc kind of taps Perez. He just kind of got squeezed in between the wall and Perez and spins him. So Perez goes for a little spin, loses front wing, all that mess. And then behind him, because all of the cars kind of concertinaed up, Mazepin rammed into the back of Russell, and that was a very scary looking incident, and another one that we're very happy to have the halo. But so then immediately after that, we get red flag number 2. So under my next note is under red flag number 2 is when we had the debate about how are we going to switch back positions. This is another time we're going to talk about Michael Masi, but the end result was that Verstappen gave the place back to Lewis, but that put him down in third, and Ocon was starting on pole for the third start of the race.
Yeah, and this is Michael, and I know they're broadcasting this stuff, and I don't know if under Charlie Whiting it ever was worded this way, but when you make it sound like you're negotiating, that's not how you referee. You're the referee. You have to say, this is what the call is, or I can take it to the stewards and you're going to lose. That's how you word it to Red Bull. That's how you word it to Mercedes. You don't do this back and forth. Honestly, to me, that's just crap. You have to be the leader. You have to be the one that's in control of that situation there. He clearly wasn't. And you ended up with the audio that the entire world got to hear of him basically doing a trade back and forth is what it sounded like. And it's a bad look.
Yeah. Come back to if you need a minute, take a minute, take your time, come back to me. And then, after all that, he didn't realize that Ocon was even involved in this situation because he was, I didn't realize Ocon was there. What? Dude, you're the race director. How do you not know who's in what order before you even reach out to anyone?
Yeah, I feel like he just needed to figure out what was happening, figure out the decision, and be like, Red Bull, here's what's going to happen. If you want to protest this, then whatever, we'll go from there. But you don't kind of the negotiation with any team, I tweeted about it, and so I think somebody thought, and I said Red Bull, I think somebody thought I was alluding to them like colluding with Red Bull. I don't think that. But just so, anyway.
No, there's no collusion. This is just Michael Masi does not have a spine.
It was opening the door for something that never had to be opened.
This is like 0.80 of the season that we've had instances where Michael Masi does not have a spine. And this is the reason why we have so many instances and drivers being forced off track and aggressive driving and dangerous driving, because there's no consequence to anything, because the guy in charge has no spine. And he can be manipulated by both sides, because I'm really sick of both the messages coming, honestly.
And I'll give you an analogy. You know, it's like a baseball umpire who's got an inconsistent strike zone. And, you know, if you're a fan of the old Atlanta Braves from the 90s, you knew Tom Glavine and Greg Maddux and those guys, what would they do? They would throw out – I lost Deanna, I'm sorry. But these guys would throw the ball constantly outside of the strike zone to try to find where the limit was. And if they found an umpire that had kind of a lax limit, they would just live out there on the margins and maybe a little outside the zone the entirety of the game. If they found an umpire that had a hard limit and said, "Nuh-uh, you ain't doing that," they'd go out there a couple times and they'd bring it back into line. That's how most sports will tend to work. But when you're waffling like this, you're just opening the door for more crap, and that's what we saw.
Yeah,
it's
you're
just
gonna get just freight train. People are going to take advantage of you, and that's exactly what we've seen this entire year, and we saw it in full display today.
Yeah, it's just frustrating to watch. Like, it goes back to all the spa stuff was like, what's the time limit? Can we do this? Can we not do this? Do we do the 2 laps? Like, it was just nobody could commit to a decision, and that's what made that situation so horrible, and that's what makes all of this just like so frustrating to watch, because just even if I don't agree with the decision, I respect just coming out and giving a decision.
I mean, exactly. I mean, IndyCar says, message from race control, this is it. There may be 10 drivers that are really pissed off about that, but that's it. It's done. There's nothing else to be done at that point. And everybody just kind of, you know, I mean, we've heard Will Power go off on a tangent, you know, at the race in Detroit about, you know, how pissed off he was that, you know, he's leading the race and he couldn't cool the car down fast enough and then his engine blows up. But that was a decision, and IndyCar stood behind it. And so if you're going to have that type of a situation, you got to have the FIA stand behind Masi if he makes a decision. The problem is he doesn't feel like he has the support, so he doesn't want to make a decision. And that comes from the top, and that also comes from John Todt. So you can even go even higher than that to maybe where this problem is.
Yeah, remind me to talk about race direction and announcements when we get a little bit later into the sequence of events here. But yeah, I don't know. There's probably more to digest on that particular part, but we can probably get to yet another restart here.
Yes. Okay, so our third and final restart of the day. So on this one, Verstappen kind of got the best start off the line, but Hamilton got squeezed in between Ocon and Verstappen and kind of had a little touch with Ocon. Ocon goes wide and gets ahead of Verstappen. He then has to give the place back to Verstappen, and then later Hamilton overtakes Ocon, and then they go off into the distance, and we'll get there in a little bit. But first, behind that, Tsunoda tried a little bit of an opportunistic move on Vettel and ended up with a 5-place penalty and without a wing. And so that led to our very first virtual safety car to pick that one up.
That him going forward and reversing and going forward, it felt like a teenage driver in driver's ed, and I'm just like cringing, like, don't hit that, don't. Oh, I thought he was going to back into the wall for a second. I thought he was going to.
And the brakes are on fire.
Yeah, exactly. The car is on fire.
Yeah.
You can tell I'm a parent now because I'm just like, oh God, don't stop, please. But yeah, painful.
Yep. So that leaves the wing out there. So then next up is the Vettel and Raikkonen collision, which was just a bizarre incident on its own, but that leaves debris everywhere. So
and Aston Martin not pitting Vettel to clean that up meant that he would then continue to shed said debris for the next 10 laps.
Yes. So then we get VSC number 2, and that was on lap 28. So we have just passed the halfway mark on lap 35. And so they pick up like one piece of debris, but there's still debris everywhere else. So then we get another. By the way,
did that VSC really last like 4 seconds?
Yes.
Yeah, there was one
man
that was
ran on the track and then leaped through the hole.
It's like I saw VSC
that was to just get the
wait, what?
Yeah.
Like, what just happened here?
Yep. So it came back off, and then it came back on the next lap because they're like, yeah, we should probably go get some more of this stuff. And I think this was one of the longer ones where this is where they should have thrown the full safety car because there's debris all over. I think it's like inside like turn 1, turn 2. And then there was some like around the outside of a couple corners. Like it was just all over the place.
And pointy debris too. It looked like it would just kill tires.
And like very like on curbs near racing lines, like not in great places. And this is at the point where they should have thrown the full safety car and just cleared it all up because I think they were just getting like one piece at a time. So it took forever. And I still don't think they got everything. But so we kind of trundled around that for a while. And then get a few green flag laps in. Then Vettel loses even more of his car after those other couple incidents he was involved in. So on lap 36, we get our 4th and final VSC. So at this point, this is when Lewis had finally closed up to Max. And on this restart after VSC, Lewis tries to overtake Max. And then it just leads to this bizarre incident. Both of them go off track, but Verstappen's able to keep the position. And this eventually resulted in a 5-second penalty plus 1 penalty point on his license for Verstappen. And that then, I'm just going to keep going through all this while we're here.
No, I mean, this is now, we're now into the fateful lap 37, which basically, for all intents and purposes, really does decide the rest of the race from here.
Yep.
So we'll let you talk about it, and then we'll all react to the fun of lap 37.
Okay, so then during this lap, Verstappen is told kind of so they go along the lap. Verstappen's told to give the place back around turn 22, but to do it in the most like advantageous way possible, or strategically.
They said, straight up, do it strategically.
Yes. So that leads him to slow pretty significantly right before the DRS line. So behind him, Hamilton, at this point, has not been informed and does not get informed until after the collision. But he doesn't know what's going on. So he slows all the way down. Again, also probably trying not to give DRS to Verstappen. And so then it's just this weird incident. Verstappen slows. He's kind of in the middle of the track. It's a weird thing. He does, we find out later, brake at this point, and Hamilton runs into the back of him. And post-race, Verstappen was given a 10-second penalty, just added on to his race time, plus 2 penalty points on his license. So that is just the general overview. So opinions.
So the lap 37 part 1, I think is pretty much open and shut. Max clearly is going to get past in the DRS zone. He tries to do a mega defense. He goes off the track. He maintains the lead because of it. You can't do that.
Have we seen that before recently? Has that happened before where Lewis was trying to overtake Max and then ran 20 feet off track?
No, but this was Max going off the track by himself. He wasn't guiding anybody. He wasn't guiding Lewis.
That's true.
Off the track.
He just straight up, he was just legit missed his corner,
just missing the corner. So
unlike Brazil, where he just didn't turn the car.
I think is much more open and shut. So on this one, 5 seconds. That's appropriate. That I had no issue with. The turn 27 part of lap 37. Talk about a hot mess on both sides. Because you're basically instructing Max is getting this instruction to let him buy strategically. You generally would pick one side of the track or the other to do that. He decides to pick the middle, so that's suspect in and of itself. Lewis kind of figures out what's going on, but figures it out a little way too late. And before he has a real chance to react, he's into the back of Verstappen. Verstappen, I don't know if you would call it brake checking, but he definitely was on the brakes. So that did not help his case. And why the FIA didn't have that telemetry until after the race is another thing we can get into. But it's a violation. You can't do that. The question is then, what is the appropriate penalty? And here I think the FIA took an out because they had gone quite to the level of the Vettel thing from Baku in 2018. That's a stop-go. That's a 25-second time penalty. And now Max is in third place. They took the out. It wasn't as egregious as that. I thought Vettel ramming Hamilton was a little bit more of an important decision that was made. So, yeah, I think both penalties are ultimately where we were going to end up, but they should have made that call in the middle of the race. They shouldn't have waited till after. They shouldn't have had to wait till after. That's the problem.
Yeah, and for those that aren't aware or have the question, I can 100% confirm to you that Lewis Hamilton has no idea what's happening until he's on Max's ass, because literally the second after they collide is when Lewis's race engineer comes on the radio and says, Max is getting ready to I'm going to allow you to overtake him. It was like, you couldn't have timed it any worse, honestly. And then Lewis is like, dude, I just hit him.
Yeah.
So my point, that I mentioned earlier about remind me about the race direction. This is one of those instances where you see it in other forms of racing. I think, even like Formula E, I think does this. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but like when there's a race direction that impacts multiple drivers, there's like an announcement and it goes across the channels to the team simultaneously. There's no Michael Masi calling up Jonathan at Red Bull Racing and saying, hey, you probably should let him by and da. Okay, let me go call Toto. No, it's you don't have that. It's here is Max, let him by. And it's clear as day. Both teams instantly, should be made aware of what's happening there. I mean, but let's be honest. Hamilton and Verstappen. Hamilton is if Max doesn't brake check here, then they're both equally to blame. I mean, obviously the telemetry showed that there was a 2.4 G deceleration right as Lewis hit him. So that's what screwed over Max there. They clearly saw that he tapped the brakes, and that's what did it. But let's be honest, they're both playing the game here. Mm-hmm. I think at first Hamilton thinks like maybe he's blowing up or something weird's happening, or maybe it's like VSC number 5.
What the hell is going on? Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think he realizes, okay, like, I don't know why, but he's trying to clearly he's trying to let me overtake him. I mean, he knows that he should let him overtake because he just blew the corner. But again, this is the FIA and Formula One in 2021. We never know what's going to happen. But I think he realizes, hey, he's probably going to. We know he's going into the DRS line. And, this isn't Lewis's first game. Like, he's been there before. We joked pre-show tonight. It would have been hilarious to see both these cars cruising around at like 60 miles an hour, just nose to tail for half a lap until they got out of that next DRS zone and then continued. If Max, or Lewis just refused to overtake him until we get to that spot, that would have been actually pretty comical. But, yeah, it just goes down to there's too much indecision. There's too much, how these messages are delivered, these these personal messages where I can sit there and argue back and forth with Red Bull for 5 minutes beforehand. Max got, I think, 2 or 3 messages about letting Lewis back or Lewis behind or overtaking him before this whole incident.
Nope, just one.
Just one? Are you sure?
Just one, right in turn 22.
Okay. So maybe I'm wrong on that one. But it was definitely a lengthy amount of time. And I know that, they were talking about, mode 8, and they were changing in engine modes and as much as you can with the hybrid stuff. And I don't know, it's just the whole thing was just a complete cluster. And I had people tweeting mid race that new listeners to the show, and they're saying, "Is this normal?" And I'm like, "No, this is not normal."
Yeah, he got told in turn 22, and they said do it strategically. So then he was going full throttle kind of till that last corner, and that's when he slowed down, and then.
Yeah, I mean, you can take a cue from another FIA series, and that's WEC, where that dude just comes on the radio and says, we're going to have, car 33 and car 44 invert, and he's got 3/4 to do it. And okay.
And everybody gets
that message, and everybody knows what's going to happen, and there's no ambiguity. Or he's got 3 laps to do it, and he can do it whenever he chooses to.
I mean, even like Formula E, like when they do their, safety car, virtual safety cars, it's like they get a countdown.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly my point.
3, 2,
right.
So there's no, like, you're not just staring at a dashboard while trying not to hit a wall, while trying not to hit the driver in front of you, to wait for
especially
a message
here
in
where
the
everything
dash.
is so blind.
Exactly.
It was just bizarre. That just one lap was just so bizarre. Is all I have for it.
Yeah.
Okay, so then taking us to the end here. Eventually, so then they're talking about Verstappen giving the place back again. But Red Bull doesn't know, like, he hit us, we're trying to give it back, like, do we actually have to give it back? And then this went on for a few laps. And then it was actually communicated to everybody that Max needed to give the position back, but then he didn't for a few laps. Until he finally did, where he let him through, immediately passed him after getting DRS, and then shot off with DRS down the lap. So after that, Max gave the place back. His engineer did come on after and said, I don't think we needed to do that. But as he was letting Hamilton back through, Hamilton did have a bit of a slightly aggressive mood, kind of pushing him out wide, which Masi got on the radio about. But then after that, Hamilton was kind of off into the distance. So one thing I didn't mention earlier was after the second red flag, Max decided to switch onto the mediums, whereas Lewis was on the hards. So his mediums were just kind of dying off at the end. And so he fell back through and didn't have the gap to pit and get fastest lap. So that gave Lewis fastest lap. And we have a tie going into Abu Dhabi.
And we are tied 21 rounds in, 0 points between P1 and P1A in the drivers right now.
Oh, I also want to mention Hamilton did, in that last little incident, have front wing, the end plate damage, which he was also very lucky to not have to like fully replace that wing.
Yeah.
But yeah, was just setting fastest laps, fastest sectors.
And how does that suspension damage?
Yeah.
Who needs an end plate, right?
I mean, luckily it was like very slow, but I mean, you could see like with Mazepin and Russell, the kind of damage you can get with that kind of incident. So luckily they were going at like 5 miles an hour. So yeah,
5 mile an hour bumpers.
Day. A wild day. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a couple of things there. When Max finally lets Lewis by and then immediately overtakes him, I immediately have flashbacks to Spa 2008, where Lewis was instructed, he blew the corner, or the last chicane, was instructed to gave Kimi the place back, immediately repassed him, and then has the race win stripped of that day. And is
excluded,
given a massive penalty. Yeah,
you got a
significant penalty. Yeah, so I'm like, that literally, basically the exact same thing happened today. Surprisingly, going back and watching the onboards, Hamilton did not say a word after that. Fact that I thought he would have been like, "What the f?" Nothing. And I think maybe he just knew, like, I don't know. Either he knew, hey, I'm going to get this guy anyways, or I'm just going to, leave it on track or whatever. But there was no real communication at all. You just saw the shot of Toto just shaking his head, like, all right, man. But all right. So then the next point, obviously, you mentioned with Max going on the mediums. I still don't get that move. I don't know exactly what transpired there. I thought, okay, maybe Max had a lockup somewhere. I went back and watched the onboards again of that sequence, and there was nothing of any concern that I could see on the tires at all. There were no moments or anything, and it was crazy. Once Lewis got past him, it was crazy. Like, literally, I felt like the next lap, Max is all over the place trying to hold on to that tire. I mean, the car, it's squirreling like crazy. Yeah. Suddenly, where he has all this pace in sector 1, he has nothing. It was just interesting how quickly those fell off.
I will also say, to add on to your point about why Hamilton probably wasn't stressed about that. At that point, I think they had found out about the 5-second penalty. So he knew even if he probably stayed behind him, he was going to be fine. So, yeah, and I think also Max had that. So, and once he knew he couldn't pit for fastest lap because of Ocon, I think he just really nursed that thing home.
Yeah, at that point, there was nothing to be gained by pushing him anymore. The worst thing, like to your point earlier, John, if he has a puncture, that could be championship over. So, get off the curbs. You've got the 23-second gap. You might as well use it. And that's, I think, effectively what he did.
It was
That's
interesting.
when I was like waiting for this race to happen. And I was just like panicking internally. I was like, please don't explode, have a tire explode at the end here.
Oh, I was either thinking Max is going to blow a tire or that wing on Lewis's car is going to fail. Yeah. And, I was just pacing back and forth over here. until the bitter end. Yeah, I don't get the decision on the mediums. When they took off the mediums after 10 laps in, they looked rough, like really, really rough. And granted, they were on much heavier fuel loads, but I'm like, if you saw that after 10 laps, why would you stick them on the mediums? And obviously it helped in the restart. Even Valtteri made a comment, after the race about his restarts and how much he lost there. All the guys in the medium overtook him. So it worked on the, in the immediate form, but in the long range, it clearly was not the tire to be on, long term. So, I mean, lastly, it was interesting that the one time Michael Masi decides to, grow a pair is when he's commenting on Lewis running someone wide after he's had to, evade his title rival, 20 times this year to avoid contact. It's just the inconsistencies. I got a good chuckle out of that, honestly.
It was a weird thing for him to just say, threaten the black and white flag and not just throw it.
The
white flag if you're going to do that. It was just a bizarre.
Again, why are you negotiating this? It either is or it isn't, dude.
Yeah.
If you're going to throw it, fine. But why comment on it? Why even put that out there? I mean, and either that or he doesn't think that thing's going to get broadcast, and maybe that's a FOM thing. Maybe he has to have a meeting with FOM and say, stop making me look stupid. And that's fair because they may be pushing the narrative on that, and that's exactly what I think they're doing. They're making him look dumb. And I don't think he's really dumb. I think he's just
no.
I think you talk about, everyone says, is the pressure getting to Max or Lewis? I think the pressure's getting to Michael Masi. And I think that's what you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, he overnight had to replace, the best in the business, when we tragically lost Charlie. And obviously, like you mentioned earlier, Andy, we never got any of these radio messages when Charlie was with us. And who knows what happened. But from everything we've ever heard is that Charlie ran a pretty tight ship and had the respect of all the teams, that if Charlie says something, you didn't have all this, constant back and forth. Now, on any incident, you just wait for the little FIA radio pop-up box because something stupid is going to happen from one of the team or another.
Right.
And it just makes me hate all of them, honestly. Yeah. I'm like, please just shut up.
I'll do a different analogy. If you watch a soccer game and you sometimes watch the refs, the good ones, will call the captains, the guys with the armbands, over and say, okay, look, whatever's happened to this point, stop it. Next one's going to get a card or something like that. He never does that. You never hear that. And again, that could be
going back to your baseball analogy. Umpire walks up, points to that bench.
Right.
You get a warning. You hit somebody next, and somebody's getting tossed.
Right. Exactly. So, you got to draw a line in the sand
and stick with it,
because both of these drivers are going to push the envelope, and they're right to do that. I think you're not being a good sport, or you're not being a good sportsman if you're not pushing that. That doesn't make Max or Lewis bad people. It makes them they're competitors. They're competing, and they have to push the limit. That's their job.
Yeah.
I just hope after this season we just get a renewed rule book.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of things that they need to look into and fix that we've exploited this year.
Well, the FIA is going to have a new election. They're going to get a new president. John Tott is stepping down. So hopefully, I just hope whoever wins. And I don't know anything about any of the. There's two guys. There's one guy from England and there's one guy from United Arab Emirates. And apparently it's going to be the guy from the United Arab Emirates that's going to probably win. I just hope he's a take charge type of guy and can lead from the top down, because that's what that organization needs.
And obviously we have a lot more to discuss with some of the other drivers. And there was a lot of other good action on track besides just the two at the front. But, if you think into Abu Dhabi, obviously we're in a dead tie. The only thing, literally, at this point, I don't care who wins. I mean, obviously, I want my boy to win, but I don't care who wins. I just, please don't end this championship in a collision, because, I feel like you kind of have given Verstappen incentive here to drive aggressively and to pull Schumacher and to pull Senna, and just, I mean, theoretically, all he's got to do is lap one, turn one, just not turn, hit Hamilton, and the championship's over because he has to count back on wins, thanks to Spa and some other things. But I'm just hoping that after maybe one of the best seasons in F1 history, at least in the top five without a doubt, definitely maybe the best or the tightest. If 2008 was obviously pretty damn amazing how that ended, on the last lap there. But I mean, this is going to be since 1974. It's the first time we've had a tied championship going in the final race. Just please don't let it end in collision. That's all I ask, guys. It's let it be based on pace or strategy or something, please. I don't want reliability issues. I don't want gearbox. I don't want to see smoke on anybody's car next week, next Sunday. Just let both drivers finish and may the best man win. Please.
It's a fair ask.
Yep.
It's a fair ask.